21323.
We are now on the air.
Okay, on the air.
Okay, so this is the February 13th meeting of the Kennebunkport Conservation Commission. And first on the agenda is voting to accept minutes from the January 9th meeting. I sent them to you. Could somebody make a motion?
I would happily make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And job well done there, Carol.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is a discussion with Werner about, and Robin and all of us, about the Healthy Ecosystem Ordinance. And Robin's gonna do a quick intro, and then Werner, you'll be on so we can get you home for an early supper.
Yay.
So I guess since we've really last spoken about it, I submitted the Blue Hill Healthy Ecosystems Ordinance to Werner. He provided quite a bit of feedback. And just to clarify, Werner, the reason one of the reasons, we all like the naming of it. It sounded a little less harsh. And also that it was a town somewhat comparable to Kennebunkport. It's not Portland, it's not South Portland. Like, those are not as easy to compare. And I've had the most contact with the people who wrote that ordinance and passed it through and how they did it. So they were very helpful about some of the obstacles. One of the things, the filing, I think I might have mentioned to you, when you have a pesticide ordinance written, you need to submit it to the state in a timely fashion, and they look at the ordinance, and then you have to submit it again if it's voted on, to make sure nothing's changed. They're very particular about that. And the people that did the Citizens Initiative did submit that to the town, but the clerk did not submit it, so they were going to make them go through the entire process again, but some kind of interference happened and they allowed it to go on the next vote. So that was, that clears up one of the issues Werner spoke of, and then, others were grammatical. And I would like to know, you mentioned your first point of feedback was that just because an ordinance passes doesn't mean it's a good ordinance. So I didn't know if you were meaning like that's a bad ordinance, or we really need you to tell us what you think would work.
Sure.
So if you could, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me out, It's not often that, that we get together. So no, this is good. So I'm happy to clarify that, statement, and we see this all the time, just because somebody proposes an ordinance, puts it in front of the voters and goes through a process and, and gains public support for that, doesn't necessarily mean that it's good language. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's enforceable. All that means is that you were able to get a majority of the people to vote for it. I think we could all point to different aspects, whether it's, federal, state, or local ordinances that we look at and say, wow, like, that's not great.
Yeah, confusing. Or
Right, that's confusing, or there's conflicts here. So that was really my point, was that you shouldn't take just on its face, just because 75% of the people voted for it, that it was, that an ordinance is well-written, enforceable, or, in good standing. Every community, has, and I don't know anything about, the process that they went through. I mean, you probably know better, having discussed it with the folks that drafted it.
Yep.
But, there's no, there's no book that says, here's how you draft an ordinance, or here's a process that you should follow. That's, that there's general guidelines in terms of state law, like what communities have to do. But a lot of that really just centers around, well, did you have a public hearing? And more, they're more process oriented, versus maybe applicability or whether or not it's enforceable or not. So
I think they did a lot of education, like big education. They had Elliot Coleman, and I believe they had public hearings, and one of the authors, I believe, had been a selectman in the past, so they had like a doctor, a political person, and like a communications person. Those were the three that drafted it. So I think they did their due diligence in, you know, letting the public have their input, and they did quite a bit of art about it that was, you know, very effective. And, you know, it just seemed like their town ran, you know, similar to ours. Maybe we're a little more refined. I don't know if that's the right word, but that was the process. They went through all the steps. But it was a citizens' initiative because the selectmen did not want to pick that up. So they just went ahead and did it and got, I don't know, as many 200 signatures or whatever they needed, and it passed quite easily. But they did do a lot of education, which we have been working on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think those are all, I mean, those are all important pieces.
And the
you know.
enforcement, they struggle with that. I mean, it seems like in Portland, I did read, they did give someone a $500 fine for putting Roundup on bamboo in a Section 8 housing area. They got a $500 fine. So that was their solution, and they have done it, but Portland's a big town. And Blue Hill, they have a fine structure, but again, you know, enforcement is obviously hard.
I think that's going to be one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight, because that's obviously something where the town has a big concern, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the reality with any ordinance,
Yeah.
you know, is that, you know, once you go through a process with it, and, you know, and I can tell you, so, you know, typically whenever when we develop an ordinance or we're doing amendments, well, you're seeing it right now if you're following, you know, we have a couple of amendments that are in front of the, you know, the Board of Selectmen at the moment. And so, you know, there's usually something that spurs, you know, the need for, you know, for the amendment. And then, you know, typically what we'll do, you know, it all depends kind of which department it comes out of. So right now, you know, we have a couple. I'll speak to the, you know, kind of generally what we have is we have a couple of ones that are, you know, land use related. Big surprise. And so, you know, we've taken an initial kind of stab and draft at that language, presented it to the Board of Selectmen in terms of, you know, getting some feedback, initial reactions. And then, at least with us, part of that is also then taking it and sending it, you know, once we've gotten a sense from, you know, from the selectmen as to whether or not, you know, there are some that are what I would call optional, you know, and then there's others that are, you know, maybe not optional, right? You know, so we try to give them a sense of what that looks like, and where you know, why it's coming forward to them. But then, you know, the next step really is, you know, then going through a legal review process. You know, once we know, select board is ready to, you know, have us move along with that, then at that point, then we'll commit to having legal review done. You know, there's not much point in having a legal review of an ordinance done if your selectmen aren't indicating that they're going to move forward with, you know, the concept or the idea even. So, you know, so that's right now process-wise. That's, you know, about where we're at. We did some, you know, we've got some draft language that's out there. We've done, you know, some initial, you know, discussions. Ultimately, those will also wind up, again, because they're land use related, they'll go in front of they'll go to the planning board, you know, just to make them aware of them. At some point along in the process, growth planning also looks at that just in terms of whether or not it, you know, to render a decision on whether or not it's consistent with the comp plan. And again, that doesn't, you know, so consistency or inconsistency with the comp plan doesn't mean you don't put it on. You know, it's just somebody else looked at it, said, yep, this is in line with, you know, the direction that, you know, the voters approved. Sometimes it's specific, sometimes it's not. You know, it all depends. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of timing, you know, you think about it, we wind up with draft ordinance language right now in February, you know, so and some of these things we've been, you know, either had as a list or we're working on prior to, but you figure this is getting ready for June, so, it takes a fair number of months to kind of walk through the town's internal policy and process for ordinance amendments. Mostly just because we want to make sure we've given enough time to, to do the due diligence that we need. So.
May I just ask a question about that point you made, because I just find that rather fascinating, that an ordinance can be put forward, and what I heard you say is that, do you not get extra points or some weighted, criteria if it's in alignment with the comp plan versus not in alignment? Like, that's just fascinating. I mean, to what extent is the comp plan used as a measure of the
Sure.
voters,
Well, it's a direction document, right?
Yeah.
So, it's, I would say comp plans, generally speaking, are the 40,000-foot view,
Yeah.
of town direction, and so, and then whenever you start getting into ordinance, now we're at the, now we're boots on the ground,
Yeah,
with it.
yeah.
So, I mean, you could have a citizen's initiative for a particular ordinance that's inconsistent with the comp plan, and it doesn't mean it doesn't go in front of the voters, I mean, it helps for it to be consistent, and I think that's how you overall get general public support for something, because you can point to it and say, hey, comprehensive plan, it passed, it received X, not dissimilar to what, you all have said with your survey work, right? Surveys have provided some general support. So you point to those items. Ultimately, and this is where the rubber then really meets the road is, how do you stand up in the face of a legal challenge? And, if a ordinance or a portion of an ordinance, isn't consistent with an approved comp plan, then there's an applicability issue.
Yeah.
I believe it is in the
So-
comp plan.
It is.
Yeah.
It is in the
Right.
comp plan.
Yeah.
So that is not a hurdle we'll have to worry about.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's the, that's the whole kind of, point of the comp plan. And sometimes, we'll get amendments that aren't, I mean, if you had to mention everything, every potential thought or outcome, I mean, comp plan is big enough as it is, you
Yeah.
would,
Okay, that's good. Good to
but,
know.
so, a good example now, we have an amendment, as it relates to, doing some amendments for private roads. And really the driving force behind that is looking at new fire apparatus that the town, is under contract to get. And so when planning board may do a review of a private road, depending on what it is, I mean, ultimately they, as a matter of their own practice, they look to the chief to say, hey, chief, what do you think? And so where we now know truck specs, it's, we try to have a logical progression to say, all right, here's the truck, here's the specs, here's some designs for, primarily we're dealing with the turnarounds, cul-de-sac, hammerhead, that kind of thing. But it helps to have those things in ordinance. Now, does the comp plan say anything about this? Nope. But there is going to be general support in the plan for, having, adequate access for your fire apparatus and things like that. So sometimes the language is general, sometimes it's very specific.
So in terms of enforcement, so I looked
you ready?
today at the short-term rental ordinance,
Yeah,
and I noticed that all of it pertains to enforcement and taking issue with, shall we say, people who actually have licenses. And I read it like 3 or 4 times, so I may be wrong, but nowhere do I see, and this I just thought it was curious, but then I'll get to my point, that, if somebody was running a short-term rental out of their house or out of something else, and they don't have a license, but they're doing it anyway, there's nothing, it doesn't say anything about that, which I thought was odd. Do you think that's a hole of some sort, or?
I don't know that it's necessarily whole, but it's pretty clear, it's pretty clear if the ordinance says, if you're gonna do X, then you need to do Y,
Right.
And, and that's something that they're not doing, that you've got a violation of that.
Right,
And
and the so I guess the reason there's no dollar amount in there is because that's set separately by the Board of Selectmen, so it doesn't actually go in the ordinance, is that why?
you mean as far as like a fine or fees?
Yeah, it's fine, they mention fines, but
Yeah.
there's no dollar amount.
No, it's a good question, and this is a fun one, for folks. So you can put fines in an ordinance all day long. At the end, and if you get people to pay it, great. That's good, like that shows, kind of a voluntary compliance piece with it there.
Yeah.
People often ask, us about, fines. Well, so-and-so should be fined for this, or so-and-so should be fined for that. Well, we can only fine based off of what we've been, granted legislative authority to do. And so unless it's specifically noted that, hey, you're able to do X, under a specific authorization, we're not able to just, randomly make that up. Otherwise, it's determined by the court,
So
so
does that mean that if there's no dollar amount in the ordinance, that it's harder to fine?
it's very much, correct,
Because
right.
what, most of the punitive damages in there seem to be, we're going to take away your license,
Yeah,
which.
and at the end of the day, sometimes, sometimes that piece of it has a higher, has a higher sting than,
Any
state,
fine.
state statute is gonna say, well, every day a violation exists. The typical line is, it's a minimum $100 a day, for each day that the violation continues to exist. Well, I can tell you practically speaking, by the time you get through the court system and the violation persists, you're gonna wind up sometimes with a stupid number, associated with, a land use, issue. And, I mean, we recently had, a circumstance that, that went through that process, notice of violation, opportunity to correct, all and on and on and on, ultimately went through the court system. And at that point, I mean, we know practically speaking what the likelihood of, of what fines and penalties look like.
Yeah.
And so we knew that, generally speaking, the courts, for certain violations, they're not going to assign fines. Like you can ask, but you're not going to get it. Even to this point, to that, particular issue, the court only awarded half the attorney's fees,
Oh,
for
wow.
that. So
So,
even though the town, asked specifically for essentially just a,
get paid back.
yeah, right, exactly, just to get paid back for legal fees. That didn't include, staff time and all of that goes into that, so.
So interestingly, I looked at the South Portland ordinance today, and it's a pretty significant ordinance. In terms of enforcement, they have obviously more resources. They have a committee that was put together to look at exceptions, which has some licensed type of people on it. And then the code enforcement officer and their sustainability officer are the people who are responsible for dealing with any complaints. And the complaints are logged in a very similar way, it sounds like, to how we do our short-term rental info, by the fact that they come in, you log them, and then you write down what you did as a result, and you have a record of that. And that's really, they don't have any fines. Basically, they just work with the complainant, or whatever it would be, the person about whom you're being complained, to educate them on what can be done in terms of doing a more holistic kind of treatment. So I was wondering what you felt about that. Not so much the committee part, because that's something that we could turn this committee into, but I don't know that we would suggest that. But regardless, if it was something that was just looked at, a complaint comes in, it's logged by the town, this committee then does education, and that's it. And that would be the enforcement piece. So it's like an educative enforcement
I see,
piece.
okay.
What if it's the actual company that's,
That's,
I feel like we don't have one pesticide applicating company that is from Kennebunkport. And I do feel this is a public health issue, and I feel like, they should be required to accept the law if it becomes a law, in our town and only use organic or whatever. Or hopefully we can convince people to, just a few different strategies around the yard to, keep the ticks away a little bit better.
But I think you could handle that in the same way as a complaint would come in, and then you would go talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, does that sound too onerous from the town's perspective? In your opinion now, and we won't hold you to it.
To be honest with you, I don't know, because, one, I think, one, it would be good to hear from South Portland in terms of what their, what has their level of activity been with that?
Yeah, is
that's
it
an important,
hundreds?
it's
Is
an
it
important question,
And we will get that information. I can tell you that Portland, who does have a fine system, because you brought it up earlier, I think their ordinance went through in 2017 or 2018. They have had one fine, and it was this year, and it made the newspaper. So I think it's not a lot of activity.
Yeah, I don't have any data to say one way or the other, I can tell you that, there's a difference, in terms of enforcement whenever you look at something that's going to be there, right? So somebody builds something without a permit, it's pretty clear, it's there, something that's related to, that's human behavioral activity. In order to, and this is just as I walk through a process, like, what does this look like, right? So, all right, phone rings, right? You get a phone call. My neighbor's out there, he's got a backpack blower on, and he's spraying the trees, So, what that now entails is that means that, that staff that's working on something has to stop what they're doing, and then at that point, respond to that. So now staff shows up, right, responds to this. Now what does that process look like? Now there's all right, what is this? Is there a violation here or not? So to some degree, what am I looking for? One,
Right.
I can tell you staff, I don't know of many code officers that are qualified, to determine what's being sprayed at that point. Quite frankly, you got to have a willing
But,
property
now
owner.
You're thinking of it in terms of it must be proven, as in proven in a court of law. But what would happen in the suggestion I'm making would be, it would come in, the person would say their name, the person's name, what they observed, when they observed it, and so forth. And then someone would not, at that particular time, wouldn't drop everything and run over there to confirm that it was happening, but would follow up with that person and have a conversation with them.
So what do you think the response to that's going to be?
Depends who it is.
It depends, and it's
Are
not.
they guilty
it's
or not?
It's not perfect, but I think there are a lot of things that happen in this town. For example, the loose dog rule, right? Somebody has a dog that gets on their property, it's not their dog, they call the police have them drop everything, actually, and send somebody over there. The dog's no longer there.
Yep.
It's
So,
not.
so here's my thought, right?
Yeah.
So we get a phone call, right? Carol Morris, she's out there. I see it right now. She's spraying.
I'm taking video.
That's right. Great. So staff takes that message in, then whoever, property owner, got it, we got the location, staff follows up. All right. Carol, we got a call from your neighbor that says that you were spraying on your property. And Carol's response is, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't spraying on my property. That wasn't me.
Werner, absolutely that would
You know,
happen. But the
and-
other thing is I can see something happening over the first few years where somebody would go, oh, I didn't realize it was illegal. Or I kind of knew it was illegal, but darn it, I have this stuff in my grass and I don't
Right.
know what to do about it.
Yep.
And then you move it, you move the needle. So, I know we're not going to come to an agreement on this now, but I feel like there's got to be a solution that is not too onerous for staff time, but will still help to move the activity or stop the activity that we're trying
Yeah.
to stop.
Yeah, and I think, setting up, what it sounds like you're looking at is, the next step beyond from, your educational process.
Right.
You know, and I think that, you know, like anything, you know, ordinances grow. You know, I mean, that's, you know, when was the last time you saw a law get any smaller or easier to deal with?
Right.
You know, I mean, you know,
Right.
some do on occasion, but that tends to be pretty rare, you know, because typically there's some other tweak, there's some other change, there's something else along the line that, you know, that comes into play. So, I mean, you know, what do I think of that? I don't know, like, because I don't know what kind of time commitment that then translates into. You know, ultimately, whenever there's new ordinance that come into play, I like to have a sense to tell folks, you know, like, what's the impact of that, right? Like, what's the potential fiscal impact of that? You know, maybe it's it's estimation of time. You know, we went through an estimation when dealing with the short-term rental piece. You know, we had to try to estimate, like, all right, what's this going to look like, you know, in terms of staff time and resources and things like that. So,
And is that something that, I'm presuming the Board of Selectmen, you share that information, it's part of their whole,
Packet.
right, their whole packet and
I mean,
what
you
they
know,
use
so I can tell you, you know, I mean, the stuff we're working on now, you know, like, doesn't really have a fiscal, you know, impact to it, you know. Having a cul-de-sac standard, you know, for a planning board process, you know, quite frankly, that probably saves me time, you know, by having that in ordinance, makes it easier for folks to design.
Yeah.
Now, is that gonna have a fiscal impact? Sure, on the property owner, you know, but that's not something I can really estimate, you know, and that's not what our responsibility is, you know, in terms of, you know, an ordinance. We're more, you know, if we're gonna estimate anything, it's gonna be, you know, essentially time and resources that we can think of, you know, that it's gonna cost. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can, you know, throw thoughts against the wall, but I'm not sure how accurate they would be. You know, I mean, you could say, all right, what do we do if we get, you know, 30 calls a year? You know, something like that. You know, I mean, I can, you know, guesstimate, you know, what that might take in terms of time. You know, but a lot of it too depends on the time of year. You know, and when, you know, and when that happens.
Obviously going to be summer.
Right, yeah. I mean, you know, just thinking about, you know, short-term rentals, I mean, I think we've, you know, I haven't done an analysis yet on time, but, you know, I hear the conversations, I know the things that we've been working through, and, you know, these things are, they're time intense, and one conversation leads to another conversation. And it isn't necessarily just the specifics in terms of, you know, that particular circumstance. It's, you know, everybody who walks in the door that has a question, you know.
Yeah,
You know, the
sure.
5-minute question is really a 20-minute discussion, you know, that happens as part of it, so. But,
Can I just make one more point? I think, you know, most people do respect the law and want to do the right thing and maybe had no idea there was a choice of, because I know like, a lot of the spraying companies, they don't really tell you about they try the standard synthetic first. I mean, that's been my experience in my field. And, you know, you have to specifically ask, you may even have to nag them. So I do think people, if it was a law and they were aware of the law, would be more inclined. And I would think the applicator companies must be reading the writing on the wall a little bit by now. And the other thing I'd like to point out is all these pesticides, you know, they're tested by the manufacturers. They're not, you know, so, and I think as I do more research, a lot of these chemicals, they are more in the limelight. They are discovering the harmful effects, particularly on children and, you know, aquatic systems. So this is more on the radar now, and I think more research is being done independently. I know they had a physician speak at one of their educational meetings in Blue Hill about the negative health effects. And I just think that, you know, more and more of that's going to show up. So if we had a law on the books, it just makes it that much, you know, easier when these harmful effects are, you know, discovered and, you know, put in the news. People will think about it more and they'll think, well, we have a pesticide ordinance anyway. So I think this is up and coming. This is everywhere. You do research on pesticides,
Yeah.
and there's so much research going on right now because they are discovering
Yeah.
it has some negative effects, and, especially on the ocean, and children are very vulnerable to that. So these are not things made up, and more of this is coming up,
And can
So,
yeah. go
I'm
ahead.
hearing two different processes though here.
Yeah,
You know, so I got a Blue Hill ordinance over here that's a prohibition, essentially.
but
you know,
still not enforced.
And I have an educational, kind of
Yeah.
an educational piece of it.
It's absolutely a multi-pronged approach. It's the only way to shift consciousness and change actions is education helps
So do
to
you think you
spur-
want that combined into two? Or
No,
like,
we're-
does
we're
that come
working-
together in?
We're
in-
working on both, really.
Right.
We've got, multiple educational opportunities. We're trying to inspire people to do the right thing by taking the pledge to be a part of the pollinator pathway, which is all throughout New England. It's a huge regional effort, and so people can take that pledge to not use pesticides and a do no harm sort of approach on their land. And that's all great, and we also know that there are people who may not be convinced by the science or whatever that's out there, and may just want their unnatural perfect lawn, which a perfect lawn is unnatural, and need to be sort of, invited via a pesticide ordinance or a healthy ecosystem ordinance to support what is better for the town, so.
I mean, to be frank, if we thought there was a chance to have an outright ban that would be enforced that could actually stop any pesticides from going into any land in Kennebunkport,
And see.
we would be all for it. But that's not realistic. So we are trying to find something that does not put undue strain on town resources and is realistic and will get people moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
What we perceive to be the right direction.
And I think though you hit on an important word, and that's the realistic versus unrealistic, and so to say on one hand, we want an ordinance that's not going to cause a strain on town resources, but at the same time you're going to have something that that tries to govern and direct people's behavior. Like those two don't match. I mean, you're
Yeah.
going to have if you're going to have something like that be successful, and have people. I mean, the expectation is that you put something on the books, right? That it gets enforced. And so, to me, then hearing communities that have voted on something and have it on the books, and then also to hear in the same phrase that it's not enforced, well, what have you done? At that point now you've created this unrealistic expectation to folks that something's being enforced, right?
I think we look at it as you have to start somewhere. I mean, DDT used to be
Sure.
legal.
Oh, 100%.
In my lifetime.
Yeah.
So, and I think getting the town to understand through surveys, potentially another survey, other things that we hear from people who will be writing emails to the select board and so forth, that this is of importance to the town and that many people in town do want this.
Yeah.
I think that's something that
And I think it's good to have those, it's good to have data points, and I think, we've talked about that, before. And I think, with your educational efforts that you've done and folks who've taken, this pledge, it would be interesting to see what your, percentage of population and how that's been going. Like, so what has been the effect of your education, in that regard?
Right, and I would say that we'd probably be prepared to go out again after this summer, for example. We possibly might get some movement in that, so. Because there's several communities around us that are also very interested in this kind of a thing. I mean, there were 200 plus people who showed up to a rewilding event in Kennebunk a week ago Saturday.
Right
200
after the
people.
frigid cold.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Well,
it
yeah,
was-
everyone wants to think spring and
It's true.
planting and,
Good timing, but also,
Yep.
it's the timing of the
But, I mean,
sentiment.
that's a particular, I would guess that everybody in that room would be is anti-synthetic pesticides. So I guess, we're here
And
to hear from you.
and that's
about-
great. I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful, but, you also have to recognize that in many ways you're preaching to the choir at that point, so.
The choir is getting bigger.
And excellent. The more folks that you have that, that choose to make those types of changes in terms of their land management, then the better that process is.
All right. So I think that, I mean, we're just here to try to hear from you about what we can do to be as accommodating as possible to the town's concerns.
Yeah, and I can, so the reality of it is that, I don't necessarily try to take, a position, one way or the other, with an ordinance. It's all, it's about, being reactive and looking at it and saying, all right, so what's it take to put this into place? What does this take to actually, to put this into enforcement? And to make this work, and we can give guesstimates for that, based on just, what we think it would take. So, also too, I know there was some discussion a little bit about ordinance structure. Because same thing, I looked at some of the things on the state, website, and, they're a little bit of, they're a little bit of everywhere. In terms of, what's in some of them and what's not in some of them. And so, I don't know if you want to talk about any of that or not, but.
Are you referring to the like 30 or so ordinances we have in the state? Is
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty varied, like Rangeley is like, just can't spray within 1 mile of town. That's what the ordinance, it's like 2 sentences, and then it's all the way to some of the more complicated ones. So they are all over the place, and
Right.
I think the Rangeley one is very old too, but, it makes sense there, I mean, it makes sense everywhere, but, so you're right, they are all over the place, so it's hard to get a feel for exactly how ours should be.
So, here's a question that, and I saw that this come up kind of numerous times. What are your thoughts on the fact that a lot of these ordinances exempt commercial properties from that?
I think that's a poor idea, myself.
Yeah, I mean.
So like any, commercial farming activities and things like that, arguably you could say is.
I thought you meant like hotels, because I was thinking.
Oh,
down
no,
here.
no.
Hotels, banks,
Well-
Right.
restaurants.
It may be that, I'm not sure if my microphone's on.
Here.
Get the green light. Okay, thanks. It may be, and I don't know any specifics of the various towns, but some of them may believe to have an ordinance which starts out small, and we've talked about this. Ordinances don't tend to get smaller, they tend to get bigger. But perhaps in some of these communities, that may have been something that would put the ordinance over the edge in terms of passing a board of selectmen, because it didn't interfere with commercial agriculture or other things that may be of important economic status in that particular community. And I think that, we have to look carefully at the different users and what it is that we really are trying to achieve, at least initially. I mean, ideally, if you're going to have a no pesticide ordinance, that's what it would mean. But
Right.
There may be specific reasons why, or, you have to factor in the economics and different things. So I think there are communities which have accepted that, accepted, or a place which has been hard hit by the brown moths, and so, okay, that's an exemption because it causes great damage. So I think that there are different ways to approach it, and, we may be, one way is initially to talk about just residential use.
Yeah, and again, it was more kind of a curiosity question, because that was one of the things that I saw in a couple of them, and I think even in the Blue Hill one, they specifically exempted, commercial ag activity. And, because to me, I was like, well, I mean, wouldn't that actually be wouldn't you start with your larger landowners, that do it much more broadly? And certainly just, if I'm having to deal with individual interactions with people, if I've got, say I've got a farmer that works 150 acres, then isn't that more effective in terms of just dealing with land area, as opposed to, I've got, 240 property owners, within that same 150 acre area.
I think all the ag that we
Right.
have in Kennebunkport, however, is already organic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an example that works for us,
Right,
but it was just a question that as I looked at it.
Building
it's like,
community
well,
and creating
you
an
know,
environment that brings people
you
together
know, if you're
helps
de-
organizations
and
thrive.
likewise, in terms of the applications, that, you know, dealing with individual property owners, you know, as you can imagine, that's a time-consuming process, because not only, you know, are you dealing, I suspect, I mean, you're dealing with an educational process, but it's, you know, there's a lot that I can see going into that, dealing with an individual property owner, you know, as opposed to, you know, if you directed more towards, here's a commercial applicators. You know, I think I've seen that in a couple of ordinances where you're dealing with specifically, I think in, you know, the Falmouth one where they were, just primarily going with a reporting piece. You know, I mean, that was a commercial, you know, getting data from commercial applicators, to try to just start to understand what it was that was actually going on in town.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that also just speaks to data points in
We
terms
did
of
try
saying,
to have that done,
That was the one that was voted.
but
That's the
selectmen
one that the
down.
Board of Selectmen would not pass
They
along.
wouldn't touch it.
yeah,
And
So-
again, partly it was the languaging, the structure,
sure, yeah,
that didn't meet what was considered from this town, the standard in terms of how an ordinance was structured or
Yeah.
written. And in fact, as a consequence of that, Dr. Stephen Hanna has written written and given to us at least, our
It's on our
commission
website.
members, 8 December, the rationale for a healthy ecosystem ordinance for outside pesticide and fertilizer regulations for our town. And he does distinguish the worst actors. So we do have to remember that there's 50 shades of gray here in terms of choice points. And that's part of the education that we want to bring. And it would be a win-win regardless of whether it's on the books or not. For me personally, and I'm sure everyone here agrees, that's the end game, is when people choicefully decide not to use a particular chemical, and realize that the impact on insects, pollinators, and the rest of the living world that we share,
Sure.
is worth it, worth the minor inconvenience or whatever it might be,
Could I just make one point about the farmers and the applicators? I mean, I know a lot of farmers because I've been in that world quite a bit. They only spray, chemicals are extremely expensive. So if you own 150 acres of land and you're growing whatever, you're not going to spray unless you absolutely have to. If you own a spraying company, that's your paycheck. You're spraying no matter what. That's a problem. Like, you know, most farmers use integrated pest management because chemicals are very expensive and they don't want to use them more than they have to. So I don't feel the same way about the applicators. They show up Tuesday, and they spray no matter what. You know, sometimes it's too windy. I mean, I'm out there, I see that. I've actually said it's too windy and they leave, but they would have done it anyway. I don't think commercial farmers, especially in Maine, are really as apt to use as many pesticides as they can just for fun, you know, and just, they don't make money on that, they lose money. So they're not gonna use more. I think there is a difference of mentality there, and, you know, farmers, you know, we have to have food, so I understand sometimes they have to do things, but I think they do as little as they have to. I don't feel the
Yeah.
same way about commercial applicators.
yeah, and you know, I hear what you're saying, and I don't have any data points in terms of conversations, you know, with any as well, other than to think, I would think that a commercial applicator, likewise, recognizing that the chemicals are expensive, is going to apply, you know, the amount that's necessary to get the results, you know, that they're looking for, you know.
It's harder to
But-
tell if there's ticks and mosquitoes, they're a little more, I mean, mosquitoes, it doesn't last for mosquitoes anyway, but, you know, I'm talking like a potato bug, you see it, you know it's there, it's doing damage. A tick, do you know if it's there or not? If there's no ticks, is it necessary to spray once a month? You know, but that's your contract. You know, you have a contract with an applicator, and that's how that works. I feel that's a little different than agriculture. I mean, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I just feel that they make money by going out every day and spraying X properties. Farmers go out and say, well, there's a few potato bugs. Can I manage that, manually, or do I just have to spray the whole thing? And they will try not to, or they'll get on it earlier, but usually they see the insect or the pest before they spray. I don't feel we do that with ticks. and-
So there's a distinction then between someone who has a contract versus a property owner, you think? Like an individual property, so let's just say a
Yeah.
property owner that doesn't have a contract.
Yeah. I'd say that's rare in Kennebunkport, that people are out spraying their own yard. Have you seen that?
Not much.
No, I mean, I've seen people, spot treat or whatever, but I haven't seen
Yep.
someone out there,
Every 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
yeah, they just pay.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is more in our town what happens, because I don't know one person that sprays their own yard, do you?
I don't.
You seen that?
So do you think then it's fair to think that, 80% of what's done is probably done by commercial applicators?
At least.
I think some of the numbers.
On residential property is what
Right,
you're talking
yeah,
Right.
residential properties.
And
right.
commercial.
I think some of the numbers in the survey showed that, and I think it might have been, and I'm gonna look and see what we can come back with. I mean, that again is that's not everybody, it's a percentage, but certainly we got the people who felt strongly about it at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, with a lot of different things, you look at, in terms of your resources, I think, you look at where your biggest bang for your buck is, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I can tell you right now, 100% compliance, is,
Right.
people have lofty ideas. I can tell you one thing, it is not a reality.
No, we know that.
Talk to the police department.
I
you
heard
know.
someone say when we were at the voting booth, even if it becomes an ordinance, I'm going to do it anyway. So.
Well, again, it's one of these, it's a human behavior,
Yeah.
that you're looking to regulate, somebody's, choice and decision.
Right.
And
right.
so, yeah, and I think that has to be, factored in, that,
Right.
even though you may have something on the books, what's the practical reality in terms of, the enforcement piece of
And
that?
that's where the education comes in and the, awareness building. But I see where you're going with this, which is sort of a little bit of the biggest bang for the buck
Well, if you got
approach.
80%, and again, I'm just throwing that as a number, if we're saying, the majority of it is done by commercial applicators, then, and you've got a little bit more of I think, a captive audience that you're dealing with, there, as opposed to, dealing with, 5 commercial applicators versus, 3,800 residents, is a much different animal.
Yeah.
In that regard. And, you're not gonna get 100%, but if you're getting, but if you're engaging in discussion, your commercial applicators, on this piece, are you able to influence that, that 80%, in that regard?
Yeah.
I think of it, similarly in, bear with me on this one, like in the world of insulation, okay? So more insulation doesn't necessarily get you a warmer, more efficient house. At some point, there's, you can keep stacking the insulation thicker and thicker, but, the amount of resource that you've spent, in order to now, try to squeeze those, those last pennies out, for
Yeah.
your heat bill,
Yeah.
it becomes, a negative.
Diminishing returns.
Right,
Yeah.
diminishing returns on that.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been helpful. You guys?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Fab.
But yeah, so in terms of, structure, I mean, we have a couple different ordinances that you can look at, in terms of the structure, piece. I think if folks need to know what the purpose is, they've got to know what it's going to apply to. I would tell you that as a general rule, like, it's good to have data, data to support why, those are the questions that, that I get. Why?
Yeah.
What's the reason? What's the
Yeah.
purpose?
Okay.
off the top of your head, can you think of an ordinance or two that exists on the books that would exemplify some of the things that you've talked to us about tonight? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I
Maybe
mean,
you can
well, I
think
can tell you
it, but-
about structure, in terms of, different, different kind of chapters and pieces that are, that are good to have. I mean, you could look at, I mean, they don't fit, it doesn't fit perfectly, but,
Yeah.
if you looked at things like, if you looked at our floodplain management ordinance, you've got things like, authority, purpose, what does it apply to? Or where does it apply to? So if you think of some ordinances, shoreline zoning is a good one. Very clear, it's applicable, 250 feet,
Yeah.
measured from this point to this point, very clear, where that applies. Definitions, is also, I mean, you want to talk about devils in the details, is that's often in the definitions. Making sure that those are relevant, making sure they're correct. Be very careful when referencing back to something that somebody else governs,
Oh, yeah.
You could point to a document that's managed by some outside third party, and then what happens when that changes?
What about the state? I assume the state would be a fairly safe reference point.
Generally speaking, but I will tell you, I've seen some ordinances where the state statute changes. We had, we had an ordinance on the books, and I can tell you, I didn't even know it was there until, a disgruntled, neighbor, pointed it out. And it referenced an old statute from the, from the 80s, that talked about a process for, if somebody had to get a variance for a replacement septic system, and that reference in state statute had been eliminated and was long gone, and so the applicability and the authority to have it had been removed from the statute, but it was still on the books. So everyone hears those stories about old laws that are still out there. But then we had to go through a process to deal with that because we now no longer had the the applicability piece behind it. So that's my only point is that whenever be careful when referencing different different pieces and documents. Again, I know Blue Hill pointed to some Canadian standards that had been modified and changed. Don't reference anything outside of the United States. You're going to start getting into some deeper legal issues, in terms of that. And just what happens when those references change, now some other outside third party is now governing, the direction, that you're headed. So,
Yeah, really good advice. That's great. Thank you.
and, think about, and I think we've talked just a little bit about this, and it's always interesting. People kind of jump to the end, when it comes to talking about ordinance. But it's important to think about process. Like what does that, what does that look like, in terms of process? We spent a lot of time talking, in the short-term rental ordinance about process and what that looked like. And then we engaged, and then we think we know what it's going to look like, but then it winds up being somewhat and slightly different whenever we get into the practical reality of it. So there is such a thing as too much process in ordinance, and there's a balance in terms of finding the right line of that. So it's good to have some in, but if you get too hung up in the nitty gritty, then then it doesn't allow for any flexibility for staff to to pivot and deal with the real world.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, and then we talked a little bit about enforcement, and then the things that you've seen in others, appeals, and some have penalties, some don't. All depends what it is that you're looking for, but
Yeah.
there's kind of some core pieces that that are important to have. But definitions too, if you have, and I think I pointed this out in some of them, like if you've got definitions that are inconsistent with other areas of your ordinance, like that's usually a red flag. If you're defining, the same thing, but you define it 3 different ways and, in your ordinances.
Use 3 different words.
yeah, that can
Yeah.
get, that can be problematic.
Well, that's
So-
very helpful.
Yeah, great.
All right,
Thank you.
sure
Very
thing,
much.
yep.
Appreciate your
Welcome,
help.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Werner.
Right. Anybody have a spare pen? Mine is.
I probably do here.
Okay. All right, so, thank you, Werner. Moving on to education and outreach.
This could be dicey. Oh, use Susan's, it's gonna be way better.
That looks an awful lot like mine that isn't working.
It may not either, no guarantees.
I'm going to brochure, because we're getting tight on time and we have a lot here. Brochure, I just, we have them, I put some in the town, I think we put them around.
Brochure,
Yes,
just holding it up for
so,
Zoom friends.
if you think of a place to put them, let me know.
Okay.
They're in my basement as we speak.
And forgive me if I've forgotten, have we talked about a targeted mailing, for example, to shoreline folk or whatever, as part of a tax bill? Something that's already going out?
We have not, no, we haven't done any of that, and probably we should have a sort of a subcommittee meeting to talk about some of these.
Okay.
things that-
Yeah, because that might
I think
help
that would
us.
be-
Back to the bang for the buck. I
The
like that
tax-
thinking.
The tax bill just
They
came
just went out, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they, Werner, while you're still here, do you happen to know if there's any town mailings that they do that they can segment by shoreland zone or anything like that? Or is it all just one big blob?
You mean as far as, like targeting specific areas?
Yes, like we have 700 or 650 of these. If we wanted them to go to a certain part of town in an existing mailing, is that I don't think it is. but-
I would say no, not unless that targeted mailing is going to that specific group,
Okay,
Right.
all right.
Okay.
I can
so-
also we can talk to the BAC
I was just
about
going to
trying to
say,
get
they
this
might know.
out.
Now, I mean, we can certainly help you figure out, if you have a targeted, geographical area. I mean, I can show you how to do that on the town's GIS maps.
Yeah,
You
we've
can,
seen
you can create, you can do different things there to select, parcels in a particular area.
Okay.
And,
But we would actually have to mail them ourselves, and we don't probably have the budget for
well, I'll leave that between you and Lori to figure that out.
that. Got it.
But we can get you the mailing list,
Yeah.
we can,
Okay.
we can show you how to generate that, that mailing list that'll do labels or,
Yeah.
or something that you can download, in an Excel spreadsheet to,
Okay.
do a mail merge with or something like that.
Okay.
So,
Great.
yeah, that's relatively straightforward,
Okay, thank you. That's
yep.
good.
Perfect.
And I
Okay.
think the BAC may have some ideas on that as well.
Okay, yeah, because I do think timing is important.
Yeah,
for
we're
when
getting
this-
to, we're getting to the,
It's time,
we're moving
yeah.
in there, yeah.
for making sure that this expenditure goes to
The right people.
as many of that
Yeah.
target,
Mm-hmm.
the target places where we perceive.
So are you
Okay.
thinking
The
like
impact is-
shoreline zone type more?
Right, for these brochures, since we only have 700, we don't have
Yeah.
enough for every household.
Yep.
So,
Okay,
Yeah, and that GIS that he mentioned that's on the town website, you can do a lot of really specific things with
You
it.
can.
Yeah.
so is that something that we should take as an action item to try to
I think so.
To try to identify
Try to
the
figure out
list.
what to do
identify
with
and then possibly cost out?
I do want to keep,
Maybe get a
I want to
sponsor
keep some
for-
back for events.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's the only thing but that should definitely be an action item, because they're not doing anybody any good sitting in my basement.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Tom Atwood event. We have it in Atlantic Hall, Kitchen Chicks, Graves Library, Kennebunkport
So many
Library,
places.
Natural Foods, Boulangerie, Brickstore Museum, the church, UCC Church, Allison's, although I don't think they put it up, Port
No, they
Hardware.
haven't, 'cause
Yeah.
I was just there.
Oh, sorry.
I know.
We found out that Bradbury's no longer has.
Oh,
Right,
that's
they
been
don't
gone
have-
forever.
I
Yeah.
know.
I just
couple
didn't
years.
know that.
That's
Yeah.
off, I hate that.
It's a shame.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
too
real,
bad.
a real shame.
How about
Yeah.
New Morning? Have one in there?
We put it in, that's
put it
in
It's
there.
there, yeah.
I'm just holding it out for people
Yeah.
at home
So
to see what it is.
How many people does the library hold?
about
Oh,
100, about
gosh,
100.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
there's plenty of,
Quite a
So
bit.
there is, someone
Yeah.
had told me they thought like it would only do 50 or 60 people,
it's
which
100.
panicked me a little bit.
no.
I
But on a
have-
Thursday night, it's way different than a Sunday afternoon on a sunny day, you know.
Yeah, it's true.
It's different on a Thursday night. I don't think we'll get the 200 people.
No, not 200, but it'd be nice to get 75 to 100. So I put 2 boosts on our Facebook, and that's doing pretty well. I sent it out to our list, and I'll send it out again. Kennebunk Conservation Trust is putting it in their newsletter and will continue to. The town will
Yeah.
do 2 blasts and also put it on the town Facebook page.
Yeah.
What about the
Um,
library? Do they have one?
Yes, and the library has it, and they'll be putting it in their one as well. Planeteers
Oh,
have included it in theirs.
About the library.
Yeah.
We can use their sandwich boards
I'm
a week.
I'm meeting
before
with
that event.
Mary Lou next Tuesday.
Yeah.
A week from tomorrow.
And we can
And
just
if
go.
anybody wants to come
Yeah.
with me, that would be nice.
Next Tuesday, do you know what time?
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock? No, 3 o'clock.
No.
Shoot, okay,
What time?
3
I mean,
o'clock.
what day?
Tuesday.
Date. Tuesday the something.
That'll be
But
the,
for sure, I know because I've had an event there.
Okay.
And I went and did the sandwich boards myself, you know, so we can do that.
That's why I'm meeting with her to find
Like-
out all the
like
things
about
that we
a-
need to do.
And it
About a
was
week
about,
ahead of
let's say, because they had something on a Sunday, my thing was Thursday, so I had to wait until like Monday morning
Okay.
and then leave them outside.
Yeah.
But if they don't have anything coming, then we could do it now,
Sooner,
you know, or, a week before, whatever would work. 21st. What
Okay.
time? 10?
3,
3. 3 is doable for me.
that would be great.
Meet with ML.
Planeteers are also have it on their publicity, as does the Kennebunk Conservation Commission on their Facebook and the Kennebunk Town Facebook. And KRA will be putting it in their newsletter as well.
We should get Shelley, she's doing something, Shelley Wigglesworth. She may put that on her, she's a master gardener and whatnot, she's doing something, and she works for
I will email
She's-
her tomorrow.
yeah.
what about the,
That might be
Did you
good.
get the town and
Our town?
tourist? I mean, with the press
I
release.
don't think no, I didn't. I did the
Okay.
press release to the Post and the York County Coast Star. So I need to do town and tourist.
Do you,
Who is that?
we all know her, gosh. Forgive us for not remembering your name.
Not
Do you-
Shelley.
No, it's,
All right, you'll
Do you-
remember her. and you'll
I'll
send-
remember, and if you want, I can reach out to her, but it's up to you, whatever.
Whatever works, just text me at 3 o'clock in the morning and you remember it.
Okay, great, perfect.
what about the Facebook group? I think I might have mentioned it, it's called the Neighborhoods of Arundel, Kennebunk, and Kennebunkport.
Yeah,
Are you-
are you on that?
Mhm,
Okay.
as an individual,
Different
yeah.
than 3 towns, 1 community?
Mm-hmm,
And
Okay,
how do
so
we get,
both.
how do we get on 3 towns, 1 community?
I don't know,
It's
it's just a group.
I'm on it, I mean, I think it's public.
You have to be accepted as a member.
But you have to join, yeah, you have to.
Okay,
right.
well.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'm on it. In
So-
fact, I often, when I post on our page, I
You-
share it.
Can you
over
share
to
it
them.
over to there?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I already have, as a matter of fact, but I'll do it
Well,
again.
We want early and often, as they say.
Mhm.
So, and you have, do you need me to send you?
Oh dear, don't need to do that, sorry. Okay, so let me take that as an action item.
Okay. So that's all I can think of to do.
yeah, it
And then-
actually has 4,000 members now,
Fantastic.
so.
And
it's
anytime
good.
we can get, I mean, I think doing it this week and then the week of is the way
Yeah.
to go.
What, do you have I'll have to can you send us that Facebook link? Because I'm trying to discern what's different between 3 towns and 1 community and that one, and why there's 2. Who knows?
Yeah, it was just created in 2019.
Okay.
The 3 towns, 1 community is Chambers one.
Right,
Yeah.
So this
This is-
is not.
No, it's not affiliated with the chamber.
okay.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty different.
So if you could send us that. Facebook, that'd be fab. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Now,
Um,
what about the planning of the booth? Do we want to have the people who were at that?
So we'll want to have a table.
Right, but we had talked about having possibly
Oh, those
one or
people?
two of the people who were there from the Saturday event at the Kennebunk Town Hall.
I mean, my inclination is, right now is no, just because I'm feeling like there's a heck of a lot going on already, and that would that take up valuable space for people?
Yeah, let's think about this. I mean, it was nice. It was very nice to be able to wander the room. Now, obviously, we're not going to duplicate that because there were a ton of tables and it was amazing.
Right.
It was really great.
Yep.
Giveaways,
Yep.
lot of really great resource and information. I just thought about that one group that had the art because that would be an incredibly beautiful backdrop. And they are moving their office to Cape Porpoise. They're currently in Cape Porpoise.
Do they have, would they be able to put, those banners were huge, there would be a place for them. But,
Maybe even where the
I
front
mean,
of that room is.
I'm, with Jeff, if it's just her, that would be fine with me.
Yeah,
And maybe we can edge them into the corner. She had like, I don't even know what to say, but they would, people could buy things, which is always a good thing. People like
Yeah.
to buy things.
so
She was very-
let's do, we should have a separate little planning thing around the details of who's gonna make the nibbles, where are we gonna get, is this,
Yes.
are we all gonna roll up our sleeves and make some cookies? I mean, how's that all gonna
Yeah.
happen? And, or could we get
I'm planning on hitting the liquor store this Friday.
somebody to donate?
If
Some
cookies at the
goodies.
liquor store.
So maybe via email or something, just a sort of list of, here's the things that ideally we can do, and if we can just divide and conquer, that would be
Yes,
great.
that would be great. Do you think,
Yeah, yeah.
can you do that email list, or? I mean,
Yeah.
We can also do a quickie Zoom call.
Yeah, either way,
This week is a relatively good week for me. Next week is gonna get harder,
okay?
so.
Well, let's start with the list.
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to make
I'm-
stuff or
okay.
buy whatever.
Okay, I'll just put together a list based on, I've held events there, and, I have, well, we all do have events.
Yeah, and we're gonna wanna have a sign-in sheet and
Yeah.
blah, 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 all that kind of stuff.
And do we want to have a, raffle idea, similar to what we did before? At the Saturday one at Kennebunk Town Hall, we raffled off a book that just came out called,
The ARC.
something The Ark by Mary Reynolds. We Are the Ark by Mary Reynolds just came out.
Although we weren't able to advertise a raffle on what we've
Or
already
even the pledge
distributed.
things, the
Yeah.
pledge, have those little
Well,
things.
there's the big question to make sure is that how organize the pollinator pathway pledge. We have to get that organized.
Right.
That's, and,
So should we get more of the
signs,
signs and we sell them? I almost wonder,
yes.
like you said, we can take money from people, like a donation.
A donation,
Because
for
I
sure.
think people that come to these, we need money.
Well, the other thing, in terms of donations, is that Mary Gickness told me,
Right.
she's down at the bottom of our list.
Yeah.
When I put a thing up in Atlantic Hall, she told me, she suggested that we have some kind of an event similar to the rewilding one with those kinds of booths with
Right.
people.
Mm-hmm,
In the second floor of
Yeah.
Atlantic Hall, which is awesome.
Yeah,
And she would time it at the same time that she has her book sale.
yeah, that'd be
which
good.
Great.
gets a lot of traffic
That would be,
already.
yeah, I think.
is
that's
this
a
under
great
new
idea.
business? Should we just put that down there?
She's like
I
the
have it
mayor of
under-
Cape
I have
Porpoise
it
too,
under,
everybody knows.
Pollinator pathway update. Is that it?
That
So
was
it-
gonna be part of that, yeah.
Okay.
And
Mary
so we're
Gickness.
really not going to sell the signs, we're just going to ask for donations, right? Because
we
if
can-
we sell the signs, then that's what the money has to go for. If the money is for a donation, then we get to use the money.
Yeah, we could have a suggested donation, because that's
So
what,
we can do a suggested donation for the signs, I think
Yeah.
that's good. Mary also told me, because I told her that we were gonna be,
Yeah.
giving away wine
Yeah.
at the Atwell event.
yeah,
She says, you can put out a jar, a contributions
Right.
jar.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You can't, for example, at Atlantic
You
Hall,
can't sell the wine,
booze,
but
you
yeah.
can have people do a contributions jar.
Okay,
Yeah.
So that'll be another way we can reach.
so I think if we get our own money will be helpful, too. everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we order the signs through Mary Ellen?
Yeah, I can do that if you want.
Yes, so we'll need to send her money, but that's okay, we have money in this year's budget.
Yep. So how
Now,
many
wait a minute,
should I
take
ask her
that back,
for?
we spent all our money in this year's budget.
Maybe
So
she'll
we may
front
have-
them
We
to
might
us.
have to have the Bank of
Use
Carol.
the wine money.
Do we need to put on your list, Jen? It seems to me that we would want someone to pour wine rather than just leave bottles of wine for people to come up and pour.
Right,
You know, I mean,
yeah.
not really a bartender, but somebody who would
Yeah.
literally
So-
fill
So
glasses
table
rather than
volunteers.
kind of
Table
table
That can
volunteers.
be, speak to anything, this,
I mean, that can clearly be us.
right.
Yeah,
Well, no, that's great. Anything you think of for the action item list, that's.
Yes,
And if it is in fact co-sponsored by Southern Maine Planeteers and the Kennebunk Conservation Commission, we might ask some of them if they'd like to.
they would definitely do it,
and
yeah.
they will help,
Yeah.
sure.
So I'll come up with that list
That would be excellent.
and send it to you, to all of us, but Jen from Southern Maine, is she from Southern Maine? I
Yes.
can't remember.
Yep.
And then who's from the Conservation Commission over at,
Jen Shack.
they're both,
Two
who's from
Jens.
Southern?
Jen,
Both
Jen
Jens?
Shack is, yeah, they're both,
Oh,
we're-
gosh, we got 3
Jens
Jens,
are just
okay.
coming out the.
Okay,
So how many signs should I ask? I know there are like 5 for the small ones and 10 for the larger ones. It seems to me like, do you want a big giant sign? I like the smaller ones myself, so.
I like the small ones, let's get
So
more small.
It
They're
depends, because
cheaper,
the
too.
small ones are good for mailboxes and
Yeah.
things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
right.
So predominantly smaller
Well, I don't know, just depends.
mix.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a mix.
So do we want like 25 small ones and 20 big ones? Do we want 50
I think-
small ones?
I think
I think
50 small ones.
50 small,
Maybe
10 big
15 or
ones
20,
something
yeah.
like that,
okay,
yeah.
50 small.
And it's easier to get a $10 donation than a $20 donation.
Yeah.
Good point.
And some people will give more. I mean, if they understand that it's a donation, it won't be.
Right.
If it's specifically tied to the sign, I think we,
And if we
lose
have more,
money.
and
Yeah.
if we have more pledges, then we'll just take their addresses and we'll, we'll have them pick up. I'm not delivering them or.
Yeah, and then Mary Ellen said they will send them out too, I think.
Oh, they will?
That's what she said.
to individual people?
Yeah.
Wow,
The postage must be.
that's so expensive.
Well, I mean, I think they just fit in a little, I don't know what they do, but
Okay,
that's
we'll
what
find-
she said.
hey.
But I will tell her we're on a roll and we need more and what is the skinny in case
Yeah.
somebody does want one.
Okay.
Now, the COS Food Pantry, this is an example of how they just, boom, have these signs that say COS, and I've one on my lawn, you know, neighbors
yeah,
helping
yeah,
Who
neighbors.
that's right.
sponsors that, by the way?
I don't know who sponsored it, but all I know is it
No,
was,
the food pantry itself. Is that,
it's its own nonprofit,
okay.
so.
Wasn't
that's
there a
the
real
stuff
estate
bus,
company,
and that's
though, that,
the-
it was a real estate company that sponsored the
Probably,
donation thing?
I don't,
Yeah, because they were here on voting day.
okay. Anyway, I was using that as an example of
yeah.
how they just, boom,
Yeah.
quickly did it, and,
Yeah.
and it's becoming a, wow, you want one of those on your
Right.
lawns. So hopefully we can do the same, elicit the same response. Okay, next.
All right, is that enough for Atwood?
That's enough for that, yep.
Annual report, just want to say thank you to Jen for pulling that
Okay,
together.
you're welcome.
That
It was great.
awesome.
Yes.
The Goose Rocks Beach invasives, so met with the town to go through the logistics. They've already got the checks, so they want to talk about, how they do it. We have someone who is going to be a good intern, I believe. We haven't met her yet, but she's has both communications and environmental experience. She's a freshman up at Bates or Colby or something like that, and went to Kennebunk High School here. So she sounds great on paper. One issue is that we talked about, that if, what's the abutter's name again? I forget his name.
Where?
At the.
The path,
margin-
the
at
pathway.
Pathway to Goose Rocks Beach from,
Cliff Mix.
Yeah, so,
I've been meaning to text him. We text one now and then.
and I think that the town has been talking with him, and
Yeah.
they have some legal issues they need to settle with him, and
Yeah.
the only issue that we need to think about is if he's gonna go and bring in mechanical stuff and rip that whole area up,
Yep.
we have to wait for after him to plant.
Right.
So I've told everybody that the earliest we can plant is this fall, and it
Yeah.
might not be until next year, but
Well, and yeah,
it would be
exactly.
good to try to get some of it done this fall, though.
It is interesting how all that sand washed in, that's kind of good for planting the grass though, because it wants pure sand. It
Yeah,
really- truly
There-
does.
there was a lot of sand movement.
Yeah, there sure was.
Okay, I don't think anything else, anyway, that's gonna be going well, and I'm kind of excited about it.
That's tremendous. I mean, that's a substantial grant.
Yeah,
It
that's
sure is.
great,
Yeah.
great news. And was the awarding of that grant on our last meeting minutes? I can't remember.
I think
I
so.
think it's so, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, just so that the public knows.
Yeah, because we
That's-
had to take out the broad
Right,
reach.
yeah, they were
Oops, and I just said it in the meeting.
notified
so
that the
sorry.
grant application for $28,611 has been awarded to the town for, specifically
The donor
for
who shall remain anonymous.
the dune restoration. Okay.
Next thing, I think, I don't know if I've told you this, but I met with Black Rock Farm, and Helena is happy to do an event in May with us. And we talked about doing a container gardening event,
Sounds great.
and it would probably be with a native container.
It's a
Working
great
with
idea.
natives, people will go crazy with it. They can either bring their own pot, or they can buy pots. She'll make sure she's got plants there.
Yeah.
So more on that, but May's gonna be coming down like a hurricane, so I will be trying to pull stuff together for that, probably for sure in March.
And is it, so it's going to be, we don't quite know, is there going to be somebody presenting, or is it more of hands-on?
It's a
Bring your
workshop. It's more of a
container,
hands-on, bring your container or buy
Okay.
a container, and here
and then
are natives that are,
select your plants?
yes, good for pollinators, good for
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera.
And obviously, some sort of money changing hands with Black Rock Farm for
yes.
people who want those?
Yes, but
Okay.
yes, I think people will definitely buy plants.
Yeah.
But you don't have to buy a pot. You can bring your own pot.
Okay, great,
We'll have to figure out whether she's gonna supply dirt or you have to bring your own, blah, blah,
Okay.
blah. So,
great.
so pollinator pathway, that also I wanted to talk about at that event. And you guys all saw the email from Mary Ellen.
Yes.
So I responded to her a little late, but I haven't heard back from her. I do have a call Wednesday with Jen Shack and the woman that you and I spoke to who's done a lot of native plant sales.
Yeah.
His name escapes me. But we have a call, Jen Shack is really interested in doing a native plant sale, a native plant festival like the one they talked about.
Okay.
I'm beginning to feel like we are probably biting off more than we
I
can chew
think
for
so.
this year.
Yeah.
But I think we could plan one for next year.
Yeah.
That would make some sense.
Yeah. And I do love the the Wild Seed Project, so they have native plant sales
Right.
and seed sales. The plants this is only the second year, I think, that they sold them this year, last fall. So it may be something we can do to partner with them for, say,
I
next.
think Mary Ellen is
Fall.
in with them. I mean, she knows, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think she's,
I'm their most frequent
I-
buyer, I feel like,
I wonder if,
because Robin
Was it
doesn't give
Julie
me any.
who was gonna be
No.
part of the calendar? It
well,
wasn't her?
I kind of live in the
Ginger.
wild everywhere.
Ginger Lawrence.
Okay, yeah, I just
And I
don't
think
remember.
Ginger Lawrence, I think might be is with Wild Seed.
Yeah, it's
That her-
Heather McCargo is the founder, but she stepped down as the executive director, so it's possible that that's the name of the executive, the
I
new
don't think
executive director.
but I'm pretty sure Ginger was at the Wild Seed table.
Okay, she's probably the new exec director,
Or
like for the last 2 years.
she could just be a volunteer.
Yeah.
She's apparently has raised a lot of natives herself, has put together a gazillion native plant sales, and so we're talking to her as a resource.
Okay, 2024 for that, okay.
So
So
I will,
it's-
yeah, we'll see how that goes. All right, I think, so pollinator pathway, she talked about doing a webinar, which might get other towns to be part of it. So I would like to do that, but we probably could do that, April, you think? Doesn't sound like we would have to do a lot.
No,
So
I think she's got it,
So it would be
Sounds
like
like it,
basically
yeah, we just have to-
officially launching, like we've had
Yeah.
a soft launch
yeah,
of the signs.
correct.
And so this would be the official launch.
April's a good time.
Yeah, and people are
April
getting
is-
in the mood.
Is a great time.
And I'm hoping to
Almost.
get somebody from Arundel, you know?
Yep.
We got to, Kennebunkport, Kennebunk, Arundel, obviously get them in, see, possibly Wells, too.
Now, obviously, Earth Day has a ton of activities. Everybody's doing things. I won't be in town for half of April. But, so I would avoid Earth Day
yeah, I think so,
specifically,
too.
I
just
agree.
because,
Yeah.
or Earth Week.
I mean, I think she's talking. she
ahead of
talked-
that would
She
be
talked
great.
about possibly doing it like, almost like a lunch and learn type thing,
Yeah,
like in the middle of the day. So it's not
okay.
a heavy lift.
So
I
we
will-
should just hone in on a date
I
for
will
that.
follow up with her again.
Okay.
I'm also good, I can also I'll talk to Jen Shack on Wednesday and make sure they want to be part of it as well.
So it's the pollinator pathway launch kind of,
Webinar. It's a
Webinar.
webinar.
yeah, but I do want to, I'm liking that we're launching something, the initiative.
I think
Well, that's-
she comes up quite, like, she comes up, starts coming up more, I think, once spring is here, it would be nice to let her speak sometime, and she's like
Sure.
dying to do that here.
Absolutely.
So like maybe at the Atlantic,
Dave, do we still have someone on?
if we lost
We
him.
still have Jesse O'Brien and Michael Dunlap.
Okay, so did we do
I think that,
ongoing issues, or are we?
we're up to ongoing issues. Do we have, we know, I gave you the update on the budget. I gave you the update on Zoom,
On the water testing?
on the water testing.
Uh-huh.
That means we have no other budget though, so we're gonna have to
Yeah.
be creative.
Feel free, you can, I can print more, so
Okay.
take all.
But that's good.
Thank you.
It's good news.
It's very good news.
Put one at
Yeah.
a 5-acre farm.
Yeah,
Okay. Is there any new business before we go to public comment?
let me just think, because I thought I had something, but it's been a flurry of, obviously, if it comes to me at 3 in the morning, I'll text you.
Text, don't call.
Remind me to put my phone on
Silent.
silent. Okay, then I'm going to officially open it up to public comment.
All right, Michael has his hand up.
And are we able to see?
No.
Okay, we should, that was one thing I thought, we should be bringing our laptops, but now this is the last
This is the last
Zoom
one,
meeting,
so.
the last actual Zoom meeting that we're having, so everything else will be in person.
Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can
Yes.
hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Well, long time, no time. I'll try to be quick. I know it's getting late. I had some prepared comments, but I'm going to deviate a little bit from that. I just observed that the manner and the certainty with which the commission disparages and dismisses the massive testing and regulatory framework around pesticides and the value that common sense applications provide to property owners is frankly stunning. You use the term science as if the regulatory entities do not also use and adhere to science, and that your science is somehow on environmentally moral high ground that is obvious beyond debate. And that if only people are educated, they will see the light with seemingly no recognition that there are smart people like myself, many others that I talk to, have already educated themselves on pesticides, the regulatory framework, and conclude fairly based on science that they are deeply vetted and regulated, and that they are valuable, and that they cause no undue harm to the environment when used in the correct manner. So some of my comments were just to sort of back up and be the person in the back room that said, hey, wait a minute. The EPA already regulates pesticides under multiple acts, FIFRA, which we all know well. It's it's 21 chapters, 4 appendices, hundreds of pages long. I spent a lot of time reading it over the summer, so I wouldn't be so dismissive of the testing processes that companies are mandated to follow. Also, Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, tolerances for food production, feeds, the Endangered Species Act. The EPA is required to ensure that pesticides do not jeopardize endangered species or their habitats. Using science, believe it or not, the EPA evaluates exposure, toxicity, and risk with respect to humans, wildlife, fish, plants, endangered species, non-target organisms, as well as food and feed production, and also how a pesticide degrades, leaches, and its risk of contamination of surface water and groundwater. And beyond that, it also establishes max contaminant levels for pesticides in water as does the Maine Center for Disease Control, has its own max exposure guidelines. So when the EPA stamps something as registered, it does mean something, okay? They've certified that it does not cause unreasonable adverse effects to humans or the environment. So now we arrive to sort of the key point of our side, or myself, I'll speak to. We believe that under no authority or experience or level of expertise, data, test, or evidence has the commission shown pesticides to be causing any unreasonable adverse effects to our town, to the point that people should be banned for going down to Home Depot once a year and putting down pre-emergent on their lawn so they have a basic yard to enjoy, or so they get tick and mosquito protection to protect their family. Again, there's nothing I've heard from the commission since this started in December of the year prior that would tell me that your views on pesticides supersede those of EPA, FIFRA, Endangered Species Act, and the Maine Board of Pesticide Control. I have a few data points I jotted down in the last day or two. It seems like lobstering is something that the commission has referred to as an ostensible area of concern regarding pesticides. And didn't take me too many minutes on Google to figure out what the York County lobster haul was for the last 10 years. And guess what? The last year the data was recorded for, 2021, was a blowout record year. It exceeded the 10-year rolling average by 20%. So there's no sort of empirical evidence there that lobstering is being damaged by pesticides. Another one I was able to quickly do homework on, water quality testing, Maine Board of Pesticide Control. The most recent testing they did was 47 domestic wells. All had detections below EPA and Maine guidelines, except for one well, and that well was subsequently tested and also below. And the item, the substance in that well was something called atrazine. Didn't know what it was, looked it up. It's apparently some pesticide that's used predominantly in the South for things like zoysia, not fescue or bluegrass like we have up here. So it's not even something we would likely find in Maine by any commercial applicator or homeowner. So again, I'll go back to what I started with in the beginning, is just somehow take a look at your meetings and maybe try to just look from the outside in and see how smart people can be incredibly infuriated and frustrated to see the manner in which you throw science around, as if your side has the monopoly on science. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Dave?
Nobody else has their hand up.
Okey-doke. Anybody have anything to say?
I mean,
Atrazine is used in Maine.
the only thing I would say is that science, as things are fluid and changing. No one knew about forever chemicals, PFAS chemicals, for example, a few years ago. Now, Maine is actually leading the way in the country, and even possibly the world, at least if you believe the experts that were at the Arundel Town Hall. What was that, 3 weeks ago that I attended, as did one of our selectmen. So in other words, as new and better detection is available, I think it's a fluid scenario, and things that you just mentioned earlier, DDT, no, everyone thought DDT was fine. So
Right.
I just don't want that lost in the conversation.
Well, I did notice when Michael said that the EPA has proven that there are no, quote, unreasonable adverse effects. I mean, to me, that says that there are adverse effects, but they've just deemed them to be reasonable. So it's definitely, I don't think that we are ever going to agree that the state and the feds are doing a good job in terms of safeguarding the public health, frankly. There's been too many times that it has gone in the opposite direction.
And people did know about PFAS. It's not many people knew about it. It's always that, a few people know.
Tip of the spear
They're like,
thing.
and then the wave. So,
Michael has his hand up again.
Yeah, so.
Okay, Michael?
Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Yeah, great points on the PFAS. My question there would be, again, coming at it from the perspective of just a homeowner who says, gee, I got a backyard. I want to go down to Home Depot. I want to put down some pre-emergent in the spring, so at least I have some semblance of grass all summer, and maybe I want to get some tick and mosquito. I personally, I'm not trying to run an auto body shop dumping solvents. I'm not trying to run some big corporate agriculture farm with all really nasty stuff that we know about pesticide wise. To your point about DDT, bingo, right on. I mean, if you look back to Rachel Carson's book, I'm sure you guys all read it, The Silent Spring. I looked this all up. She basically exposed what at the time really was a wild west of pesticides in the 60s. And that sort of kicked off the movement that ended up with us getting the EPA in the Nixon administration in 1970. So that's our point, is that, you know, we're saying, wait a minute, we have all this framework. They did good things, but it's just trying to get the commission to look at things from the perspective of someone who is not trying to, quote, spray the hell out of their yard, is not trying to overuse products, who just wants to use common sense products. And I'm looking as hard as I can at all these data points like lobster and water, and as well as empirical evidence. I drove around all last summer and I said, gee, we have a beautiful town. I certainly have a heck of a lot of bees on my plants and flowers. And it just seems like the movement towards a ban, and again, it's just from listening to what you were all talking about at the beginning, it seems like that's really what would be on the table if you could get it to pass. I just think that's a real head shaker. I think there's smart ways to go about it, but there just has to be some recognition by the commission that there are people on my side of the discussion who are smart and who are educated. And Carol, you brought up a great point about no adverse effects. You can apply that same sort of philosophy and views of risk to everything the government regulates: highway transportation, aviation. I come from an aviation background. People would be shocked if they knew what on airplanes was allowed and how many hours there were between inspection cycles, so forth and so on. And you could always look at something, whether it's aviation, pesticides, so forth and so on, and always say, well, why don't we half the inspection interval? Why don't we double this? And it just becomes a point of diminishing returns. So I just think it's not binary. I just think going for a total ban is just dismissive of the entire regulatory framework. And I think it's dismissive of the companies that operate in this space professionally and adhere to very cumbersome, very strict regulations and do it well. I think the commission would do well to be a little more understanding and a little less disparaging of those folks. But thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Michael. And we actually do intend to reach out to some of the applicators in the coming months. So thank you and have a good evening.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right.
Is that it for our agenda?
Yep.
Adjourn.
Oh.
I make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Yep.
Adjourn. Thank you there, Zoom host. And do we want to tell folks at home this is the last Zoom meeting, or is that just?
I think I'll send it out to our list of
Okay.
people. Just,
We'd love to see you here. Why not?
well, so my question is,